Autumn 1938. A schoolhouse in Bavaria, where afternoon light filters through tall windows onto rows of wooden desks. On the wall hangs a portrait of the Führer, framed in polished oak. Below it, 15 boys sit at attention, their backs straight, their eyes forward. They are 12 years old. The teacher speaks of blood and soil, of racial destiny, of a nation purified. The boys listen as if receiving scripture. Among them sits a thin boy with careful handwriting and a tendency to arrive early. His name is Klaus Hartmann. He copies every word into his notebook with the precision his father taught him. His father, a postal clerk in Munich, tells him that discipline and duty are the only virtues that matter. Klaus believes him. Klaus believes everything. The Nazi youth camps that summer smell of pine trees and wood smoke. Boys march in formation through mountain forests, singing songs about honor and sacrifice. They learn to shoot, to navigate, to endure discomfort without complaint. Klaus excels at all of it. His instructors note his dedication in their reports. He never questions an order. He never asks why. By 1939, when Germany invades Poland, Klaus is 17. He watches the newsreels in the cinema with his father, both of them silent in the darkness as panzers roll across borders and dive bombers scream down from cloudless skies. His father places a hand on his shoulder and says nothing. The gesture contains everything Klaus needs to understand about what is expected of him. In 1940, Klaus volunteers for the Wehrmacht 2 months before his 18th birthday. His father signs the permission forms without hesitation. His mother cries but quietly in another room where they cannot hear her. Klaus remembers her red eyes at breakfast the next morning but does not mention them. Some things are better left unspoken. Basic training in Prussia, where winter comes early and bitter. Klaus learns to strip and reassemble his Kar 98K rifle in darkness, to dig trenches in frozen ground, to march 30 kilometers with full pack. The sergeants are brutal in the methodical way that German military tradition demands. They break you down to rebuild you as something harder, more useful. Klaus accepts this as necessary. He has been taught to accept. The lectures come in the evening, after training, when exhaustion makes the mind more receptive. Political officers speak about Jewish conspiracies, about Bolshevik subhumans, about the biological necessity of racial purity. Klaus listens the way he listened in that schoolhouse in Bavaria, copying ideas into his mind with the same careful precision he once used for his notebooks. He does not evaluate what he hears. Evaluation is not required. Belief is. Summer 1941. Operation Barbarossa begins with the largest invasion force in human history. Klaus is assigned to the 6th Army as a Gefreiter, a lance corporal in a standard infantry company. They cross into Soviet territory in late June, when the days are long and the roads turn to dust under the weight of trucks and tanks. The villages they pass through are wooden and ancient, unchanged for centuries. The people watch them with the blank expressions of those who have seen armies before, who know that armies bring only one thing regardless of their flags or languages. Klaus sees old women standing in doorways, children hiding behind their skirts. He has been taught to see them as Untermensch, subhuman. The word sits in his mind like a stone. By September, the German advance has stalled outside Kiev. The easy victories of summer have given way to something harder, something that doesn't end. Klaus's company digs defensive positions in the black earth of Ukraine, waiting for orders that change daily. The weather turns cold earlier than expected. The men talk about winter equipment that hasn't arrived, about supply lines stretched too thin, about distances that seem to grow longer the further east they push. Klaus writes letters home that the censors approve. He tells his mother he is well. He tells his father he is doing his duty. Both statements are true and both are incomplete. What he doesn't write about are the things he has seen in the villages they occupy, the reprisal actions against partisans, the special units that arrive after the combat troops and disappear into the forest with trucks full of people who never return. He has been taught not to ask about these things. He has been taught that some aspects of war require hardness that ordinary soldiers cannot understand. He has been taught that the final solution, though never called that in his hearing, is necessary for the survival of the German race. Klaus is 20 years old and he believes what he has been taught because he has never been taught to do otherwise. December 1941. The ground is frozen solid. Snow falls in the afternoon and drifts against the walls of abandoned buildings where Klaus's company has established a temporary headquarters. The village is called Bobruisk, or maybe that was 3 villages ago. They all look the same after a while, wooden houses with broken windows and the smell of smoke that never quite leaves the air. Klaus is standing guard duty outside the commandant's office when he hears the children. There are 3 of them being marched down the village street by 2 SS men. They are perhaps 6 or 7 years old, thin as sticks, their feet wrapped in rags because they have no proper shoes. Their hands are tied with rough rope. They don't cry or resist. They just walk with the terrible obedience of those who understand what silence means. Klaus watches them pass. One of the SS men nods to him in professional acknowledgement, one soldier to another. Klaus nods back. This is normal procedure. This is part of the operation. This is what he has been taught to accept. But that night, in the cold room where his squad sleeps on wooden pallets, Klaus cannot find sleep. He sees those 3 children walking in the snow. He sees the rope around their wrists. He sees their silence, which somehow seems worse than screaming. He has been taught to see these children as enemies of the Reich, as threats to German racial purity, as necessary casualties in a larger struggle. The teaching sits in his mind alongside the image of their feet wrapped in rags. He has been taught that doubt is weakness. He has been taught that questions undermine discipline. He has been taught that the only truth that matters is the truth the Reich provides. Klaus lies on his pallet in the darkness and tries to believe what he has been taught. It is becoming harder than it should be. February 1942. The Eastern Front has become a war of attrition and frozen corpses. Klaus's company is rotated back from frontline positions to a town called Minsk, assigned to occupation duty and partisan suppression. The city is a ruin of contradictions, grand buildings left standing beside blocks reduced to rubble, shops somehow still operating while mass graves fill in the forests outside the city limits. The ghetto occupies the old Jewish quarter, sealed behind wooden fences and barbed wire. Klaus's unit provides perimeter security, checking papers at the gates, ensuring no one leaves without authorization. It is tedious work, mostly standing in the cold watching people who have already been defeated carry out the rituals of survival with diminishing hope. Klaus has learned not to look too closely at the faces. It's easier that way. To see them as categories rather than individuals, as security problems rather than human beings. His training has prepared him for this. His ideological conditioning has given him the framework to accept it. And yet, despite everything he's been taught, sometimes the faces break through anyway. Like the old man who stops at the checkpoint on a Tuesday morning, his papers in order, his yellow star sewn carefully to his coat. He is perhaps 70, bent with age and hunger, carrying a bundle of rags that might once have been clothing. He does not meet Klaus's eyes when presenting his documents. This is correct behavior. This is what is expected. Klaus returns the papers and waves him through. The old man shuffles forward, then stops, turns slightly and says something in German. His voice is quiet, barely audible over the wind. Thank you for your kindness. Klaus has shown no kindness. Klaus has simply processed his papers according to procedure. But the old man seems to believe otherwise, seems to find some fragment of human decency in the mechanical execution of duty. He continues through the gate before Klaus can respond, if response is even possible or permitted. That evening, during the briefing, the company commander explains new directives from Berlin. The ghetto population is to be reduced. Quotas have been established. Transport arrangements are being finalized. Klaus understands what is being communicated without being directly stated. He has heard the rumors. He has seen the trucks leaving in the night and returning empty. The action begins 3 days later, before dawn, when the ghetto is still dark and most people are asleep. Klaus's unit provides outer perimeter security, keeping the surrounding streets clear while SS units and Ukrainian auxiliaries enter the ghetto itself. From his position 2 blocks away, Klaus hears the shouting, the breaking of doors, the occasional gunshot. He does not need to see what is happening to know. The first trucks emerge as the sun rises, canvas covers concealing their cargo but not the sound. Klaus can hear children crying. He can hear people calling out names, looking for family members in the chaos of loading. He has been taught that this is necessary. He has been taught that this is war. He has been taught that sentiment is weakness and duty requires hardness. A woman breaks past the inner cordon, running desperately toward Klaus's position with something clutched against her chest. 2 Ukrainian auxiliaries pursue her, shouting in their language, raising their rifles. She is perhaps 30, dark hair streaming behind her, terror transforming her face into something almost unrecognizable as human. She reaches Klaus before her pursuers, stops in front of him, and in that instant of contact, presses what she's carrying into his arms. It is a child wrapped in a threadbare blanket, perhaps 4 years old. The woman says something in Yiddish that Klaus doesn't understand, then something in broken German. Please. Just hide her. Just today. Then the auxiliaries arrive and drag her away. She doesn't scream or fight. She just keeps looking back at Klaus as they pull her toward the trucks, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that feels like physical weight. Klaus stands frozen, holding a child he didn't ask for, given a choice he never wanted to make. The girl in his arms is silent. This is somehow the most disturbing part. She should be crying, screaming for her mother, but instead she just watches Klaus with dark eyes that seem far too old for her face. She has learned, as all ghetto children learn, that silence is survival. Klaus should call out to the auxiliaries. He should hand over the child immediately. This is procedure. This is regulation. This is what he has been taught to do. But in this moment, with this child in his arms and that woman's eyes still burning in his memory, Klaus discovers something he didn't know existed inside him. He turns and walks away from the checkpoint, moving quickly through the maze of side streets, the child still silent in his arms. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have any idea what he's doing or why. He just knows that he cannot hand this child over to the trucks. He knows this with a certainty that has nothing to do with his training, his ideology, or his duty as a German soldier. He knows this the way you know your own name. Klaus reaches the bombed-out apartment building his squad uses as a temporary billet. Most of the men are still on duty at the ghetto. The few remaining are asleep or drunk. He climbs to the third floor, to a room that was once someone's home and is now just broken furniture and cracked plaster. He sets the child down carefully on a pile of blankets in the corner. She watches him without moving, without making a sound. Klaus has no idea what to do next. He has no food appropriate for a child. He has no explanation for why she's here. He has no plan beyond the next few hours. All he knows is that for the first time since that schoolhouse in Bavaria, since the youth camps and the training and the indoctrination, Klaus Hartmann has chosen to disobey. The choice terrifies him more than any combat he's experienced. On the battlefield, at least the rules are clear. Kill or be killed. Advance or retreat. Follow orders or face court-martial. But this is different. This is choosing humanity over ideology, conscience over conditioning, a child's life over every principle he's been taught to hold sacred. Klaus sits on the floor across from the girl and tries to understand what he's just done. The woman in the street had called her something, a name he didn't catch in the chaos. He doesn't know what language she speaks or even if she speaks at all. The silence between them stretches out, broken only by the distant sounds of the action still underway in the ghetto. Finally, Klaus asks in German, "What is your name?" The girl doesn't answer immediately. She studies him with those two old eyes, evaluating, calculating risk. Then, so quietly he almost doesn't hear it, she says, "Sarah?" Klaus nods. "I'm Klaus." Sarah continues to watch him without responding. Trust is not something she can afford, especially not trust in a German soldier. But she's here in this room, alive when logic says she should be on those trucks. For now, that calculation appears to be enough. Klaus realizes he has no idea what comes next. He has broken every rule he's ever been taught to follow. He has betrayed his oath, his duty, his nation. If discovered, they will execute him, probably torture him first to find out who else was involved. And yet, looking at this 4-year-old girl who has learned that silence is survival, Klaus finds he cannot regret his choice. For the first time in his life, Klaus Hartmann has acted according to his own conscience rather than his conditioning. The relief is so intense it feels almost like grief. The first 48 hours are the hardest. Klaus must maintain normal duty while concealing the presence of a 4-year-old Jewish child in his squad's living quarters. The men rotate on different schedules, sleeping in shifts, rarely all present at once. This makes it possible barely to keep Sarah hidden in the small storage closet he's emptied of debris. She makes no sound. Even when alone, even when frightened, Sarah has learned the terrible discipline of silence that keeps ghetto children alive. Klaus brings her what food he can spare from his rations. Black bread, a few potatoes, water from his canteen. She eats slowly, carefully, making everything last. She has learned this too, the arithmetic of survival. On the third day, Klaus's closest friend in the company, a soldier named Fischer from Hamburg, notices him acting strangely. Fischer is not cruel, not a zealot, just an ordinary man doing his duty with the minimum enthusiasm possible. He corners Klaus during evening mess and asks directly what's wrong. Klaus considers lying, then realizes he needs help. One person cannot sustain this deception indefinitely. And Fischer, more than any other man in the unit, might understand. Might choose to help rather than report. The risk is enormous. The trust required is absolute. That night, Klaus shows him Sarah. Fischer stares at the girl for a long moment, his face unreadable. Klaus prepares himself for arrest, for immediate report to the officers, for the end of everything. Instead, Fischer says quietly, "We need to find her better hiding. This closet won't work much longer." Between them, they construct a false wall in the corner of the storage room, creating a space perhaps a meter deep where Sarah can hide with her blankets and the few possessions Klaus has scavenged for her. A worn book with pictures, a rag doll from some abandoned apartment, a small tin cup. When officers conduct inspections, Sarah disappears into this space and waits in absolute silence until they pass. The deception requires constant vigilance. Every moment is calculated, every interaction measured against the possibility of discovery. Klaus and Fischer develop systems, signals, ways of communicating danger without words. The other soldiers in the squad notice nothing or choose to notice nothing. Willful ignorance becomes its own form of resistance. Sarah remains silent through it all. She has the disturbing stillness of prey animals who survive by becoming invisible. Klaus tries to speak with her in the evening when the others are drunk or asleep. She responds in single words, fragments of sentences, as if language itself has become dangerous. He learns she is 6, not 4 as he initially thought. Malnutrition makes her appear younger. He learns her father was taken the previous year. He learns her mother's name was Rachel. He does not ask what Sarah saw before her mother pressed her into his arms. Some knowledge is too heavy to share. March becomes April. The occupation continues. Klaus's company participates in anti-partisan operations in the forests outside Minsk. They hunt shadows through the trees, engage in firefights with Soviet irregulars who disappear like smoke. Klaus kills during these operations. He does his job with the same discipline he brings to hiding Sarah. The contradiction tears at him, but he has learned to carry contradictions. In the city, the ghetto continues to shrink. More actions, more transports, more empty apartments. Klaus sees the numbers decline in the security reports. Numbers, not people. It's easier to process as numbers. The Reich runs on arithmetic, on the bureaucracy of murder conducted with ledgers and train schedules. Fischer, who before Sarah said little about the war beyond his desire to survive it, begins speaking more openly when they're alone. "I thought it would be different," he says one night, sitting across from Klaus in the darkness. "I thought we were fighting communists. Fighting for Europe. But this." He gestures vaguely toward where Sarah sleeps behind her false wall. "This isn't war. This is something else." Klaus says nothing. What is there to say? They are both complicit in the machinery even as they try to save one fragment from its gears. Their small rebellion doesn't absolve them. Sarah's survival doesn't balance against the thousands on the trains. But it is, perhaps, a gesture toward something they're still trying to name. In early May, a new officer arrives, transferred from Berlin with orders to improve ghetto security and increase transport efficiency. He is young, ambitious, a true believer in the racial ideology that Klaus was once taught to embrace. He conducts surprise inspections, reviews guard rosters, questions any irregularity in duty logs. His presence makes everything more dangerous. One afternoon, during a routine building inspection, the new officer notices the false wall. His eyes go to it immediately, the soldier's instinct for something wrong in an environment. He asks about it. Fischer, who is present, explains its structural support for damaged beams. The officer accepts this but makes a note in his inspection log. From that moment, Klaus knows their time is running out. That night, he and Fischer discuss options. They could try to move Sarah to another location, but where? The ghetto is sealed. The city is controlled. The forests are filled with partisan warfare. They could attempt to contact the resistance, but neither of them knows how, and asking questions would expose them. They could surrender to the inevitable discovery and hope for merciful execution. Or they can continue as they have been, day by day, knowing each morning might be the last. Sarah, listening from behind her wall, understands more than they realize. She has lived her entire childhood under threat of death. The false wall is just another ghetto, smaller and more personal. She has learned to carry the weight of adult decisions in a child's body. When Klaus checks on her that evening, she asks him the question he's been avoiding asking himself. "When they find me, what will happen to you?" Klaus doesn't lie to her. "They will shoot me probably." Sarah considers this with the terrible pragmatism of the condemned. "You should let me go. Before that happens." "No." "Why?" Klaus has no answer that makes sense in the world they inhabit. He has no logical justification for choosing this child's life over his own, for betraying everything he was taught, for risking execution to preserve one small point of light in vast darkness. He has only the inexplicable certainty that some choices transcend calculation. "Because you're here," he says finally. "And I can." It is perhaps the first honest thing Klaus Hartmann has said in his entire life. June 1942. Summer comes to Minsk with heat that makes the ruins smell of ash and rot. The partisan war intensifies in the surrounding forests. Klaus's company is deployed on increasingly frequent operations, pursuing Soviet irregulars who strike and disappear into the vast green wilderness of Belarus. The expeditions last days at a time. Klaus and Fischer must find someone they trust to watch Sarah during these absences. They settle on an older soldier named Werner, a baker from Dresden who has 3 daughters of his own back home. Werner says nothing when shown the false wall, just nods once and takes the responsibility without questions. Werner leaves small gifts for Sarah. A pencil, a piece of actual chocolate stolen from an officer's rations, a tiny wooden carving of a horse he makes with his pocket knife. These gestures of kindness in a place without kindness feel almost like acts of resistance themselves. Sarah, who has not smiled since the day her mother gave her away, sometimes almost smiles for Werner. The partisan operations grow more brutal. The standing orders are simple. Any village suspected of aiding Soviet irregulars is to be cleared completely. No prisoners. No exceptions. Klaus participates in these actions because refusal means execution. He hardens himself, becomes mechanical, does what is required while preserving some small part of himself that remains capable of sitting with Sarah in the evening and reading her a story in poor German. Fischer is not as successful at maintaining this separation. He begins drinking more heavily, speaking of his family back in Hamburg, wondering aloud if they would recognize him now. One night, drunk and bitter, he tells Klaus he can no longer distinguish between what they do in the forests and what they prevent in Minsk. It's all the same machinery just operating at different scales. Klaus has no comfort to offer because Fischer is right. They save one child while participating in the destruction of thousands. The mathematics of morality become impossible to calculate. But Klaus continues anyway because the alternative is giving up the one good thing he has managed to do in this war. In July, the ambitious young officer from Berlin begins conducting more frequent inspections. He seems particularly interested in Klaus's squad, studying their duty logs, questioning their movements, watching them with the cold calculation of someone looking for irregularity. Klaus knows they are under suspicion even without proof. One evening, after a long operation in the forests, Klaus returns to find Werner waiting outside the building with an expression of controlled panic. The officer conducted a surprise inspection in their absence. He brought engineers. They examined every wall, every floor, every structural element. They found nothing, but only because Werner moved Sarah to the basement at the last moment, hiding her in the ruins of the building's original foundation. He's looking for something, Werner says. He'll find it eventually. They discuss options that evening, the three of them sitting in the room above where Sarah sleeps in her temporary hiding place. They can continue the current situation, knowing discovery grows more likely each day. They can try to smuggle Sarah out of the city, though they have no contacts and no resources. They can contact the partisans, though the partisans kill German soldiers on sight and asking questions would be suicide. Or they can do what Werner suggests, which is get her false papers and try to pass her off as a German orphan being cared for by the unit. It's insane. It's impossible. The racial examination procedures are thorough. Sarah speaks poor German with a Yiddish accent. Her features, while not stereotypically Jewish, would never pass close scrutiny. But it's the only option that doesn't end in immediate execution for all of them. Fischer knows a forger, a Soviet POW working in the document processing section who produces counterfeit identity papers for black market operations. Getting access to him means bribing guards, risking exposure, trusting a prisoner who has every reason to betray them. They have no choice. They arrange a meeting. The forger is a thin man named Alexei who speaks German with a Moscow accent. He examines Sarah once, quietly, in the basement of the processing building. His face reveals nothing. Finally, he names his price: 3 bottles of vodka, 6 American cigarettes, and a written statement saying he is useful to German operations. The statement will keep him alive, possibly get him transferred to a labor camp with better conditions. Klaus provides the vodka and cigarettes. The written statement is more difficult, requiring careful composition and forged signatures. Fischer, whose father was a clerk, proves better at this than expected. They assemble the package and deliver it to Alexei, who produces papers within a week. The papers identify Sarah as Anna Schmidt, orphan from Königsberg, born January 1936, parents killed in British bombing. The documents are convincing enough to pass routine inspection but would never survive serious investigation. They are a gamble with everyone's lives as the stake. They give the papers to Sarah and begin the process of transforming her from hidden child to visible orphan. Her hair is cut short in the German style. Werner's wife, contacted through careful letters, sends a child's dress from Dresden. They teach her a new biography, a new history, a new identity that must be maintained at all times. Sarah learns this the way she learned silence, the way she learned stillness, the way she learned all the survival skills of her short life. She becomes Anna. The transformation is both complete and utterly artificial. Klaus sees both versions existing in the same small body: the Jewish girl who watched her mother be dragged away, and the German orphan who never existed except on forged papers. In August, they move her out of the building officially, reporting to the company commander that some of the men have been caring for an orphan and request permission to continue. The commander is skeptical but not enough to refuse. Orphan German children are the Reich's responsibility. Caring for them demonstrates proper racial solidarity. Sarah becomes a semi-official presence in the unit, performing small tasks, running errands, existing in plain sight where she had previously been hidden. The false papers are examined once, filed, and forgotten. The initial crisis passes. But Klaus knows this is temporary. Every day the war continues is another opportunity for exposure. Every inspection is a chance for questions. Every new officer is a potential disaster. They have bought time, nothing more. And time, in wartime, is the most expensive currency of all. September 1942. The Wehrmacht begins preparations for the winter offensive, pushing resources east for what everyone pretends will be the final defeat of the Soviet Union. Klaus's company receives orders for transfer to Stalingrad, the industrial city where the Wehrmacht believes it will break Soviet resistance permanently. The transfer means everything changes. New unit, new officers, new circumstances where Sarah's presence will be questioned again. They cannot simply bring her along with the regular camp followers. The racial inspection procedures at troop assembly points are far more thorough than field conditions allow. Anna Schmidt's papers might pass routine examination in Minsk, where the officers are tired and the bureaucracy is overwhelmed. They won't survive transfer processing. Fischer suggests leaving her with Werner, who is too old for frontline deployment and will remain with the occupation forces in Minsk. But Werner's position is even more precarious than theirs. The ambitious young officer has begun investigating irregularities in supply distribution, the small corruptions that make occupation duty bearable. Werner is exposed in these investigations. He may not be in Minsk much longer himself. Klaus considers desertion. He has heard rumors of soldiers disappearing into the forests, joining partisan units or simply trying to survive in the wilderness until the war ends. But desertion means execution for his entire family if he's caught. His parents in Munich would pay for his choice. And the partisans with good reason trust no German soldiers regardless of their motives. The days before transfer are counted in hours. Klaus spends what time he can with Sarah, reading to her in the evening, teaching her German pronunciation, maintaining the fiction of Anna Schmidt even as they both know the fiction is dissolving. She asks him what will happen when he leaves. Klaus doesn't have an answer that doesn't end in her death. On the fourth night before scheduled departure, the ambitious young officer returns with 2 military police. They arrest Werner for black market activities. The evidence is comprehensive, documented, impossible to deny. Werner is taken to the military prison in Minsk. His execution is scheduled for the following week. Klaus and Fischer attend the court-martial as character witnesses, which is all they can do. Werner maintains silence about Sarah through the entire proceeding. When sentenced, he looks at Klaus once, just once, and nods. It's a gesture of acceptance, perhaps even relief. Werner has 3 daughters in Dresden. He understands what is at stake. His silence buys their continued safety from association with his crimes. They execute Werner at dawn 3 days later. 12 men including Klaus form the firing squad. It's standard procedure for military executions. Klaus stands in line with the others, loads his rifle, and on command fires at a man who became his friend while helping hide a Jewish child from the Holocaust. Werner dies quickly. Klaus hopes at least one of the shots was his, that he could grant his friend that small mercy. Afterward, the squad is given vodka and a day's rest, the Reich's acknowledgement that executing their own requires emotional compensation. Klaus drinks until he can't think and then drinks some more. The next morning, with 2 days left before transfer, Sarah is gone. Klaus discovers her absence at dawn, returning from night duty to find her hiding space empty, her few possessions abandoned except for the wooden horse Werner carved. She has left no note, no explanation. She has simply disappeared into the city, choosing whatever fate awaits her there over the inevitable discovery that transfer would bring. Klaus and Fischer search desperately through their remaining time. They check every corner of the building, every basement, every bombed-out ruin in the surrounding blocks. They cannot ask questions. They cannot report her missing. They can only hunt silently for a 6-year-old girl who has learned to disappear. They find nothing. Sarah has vanished as completely as if she never existed. The false papers remain where she left them. Anna Schmidt abandoned in favor of survival by whatever means a child can manage in occupied Minsk. Klaus leaves for Stalingrad carrying 2 things, his rifle and Werner's wooden horse. He doesn't know if Sarah is alive or dead. He doesn't know if she made it back to what remains of the ghetto or died in some rubble pile during the first cold night. He doesn't know if his months of protection meant anything at all or just delayed the inevitable. What Klaus knows is that he tried. In a war of obedience and industrial murder, he chose one small point of resistance. He saved 1 child for a while at terrible cost. 3 men risked everything. 1 of them died. And in the end, Sarah disappeared into the chaos that consumes everything in the East. The mathematics are impossible to calculate. 1 life weighed against obedience. 1 child measured against the machinery of genocide. Klaus doesn't know if his choice mattered in any larger sense. He only knows that when asked to participate in evil, he found within himself the capacity to refuse. Even if that refusal cost him everything except his life. November 1942. Klaus arrives at Stalingrad with the 6th Army during the final days before encirclement. The city is already hell, block by block fighting through ruins where Soviet soldiers defend every basement, every stairwell, every pile of rubble with desperate fury. The Eastern Front has taught Klaus many things about war, but nothing prepared him for Stalingrad. The urban combat is intimate and merciless. Men die within arm's reach of their killers, sometimes without ever seeing their faces. The city has become an abattoir where human life measures its duration in hours. Klaus fights mechanically, surviving through instinct and luck. He thinks about Sarah constantly during the brief moments between combat. He imagines scenarios where she escaped Minsk, found partisan units, survived in the forests. He imagines her being taken back into the ghetto, loaded onto transports, killed in the death camps everyone pretends not to know about. Fischer, fighting beside him through the frozen ruins, never mentions her name. Some weights are too heavy to acknowledge. They survive day to day, rationing frozen bread and melted snow, sleeping in basements that smell of cordite and death. In January 1943, the Soviet counteroffensive encircles Stalingrad completely. The 6th Army is trapped in the ruins with no chance of relief. Hitler orders them to fight to the last man. Klaus understands what this means. They have been sacrificed to propaganda, to the fiction of German invincibility that cannot admit defeat. Fischer dies on January 19th, shot by a Soviet sniper while crossing between ruined buildings. Klaus holds him in a frozen basement while he bleeds out, the 2 of them alone in the darkness. Fischer's last words are about Hamburg, about his family, about a daughter named Greta who plays piano. He doesn't mention Sarah. He doesn't mention Werner. He just talks about home until he stops talking at all. Klaus buries him in the ruins, marking the location with stones so someone might someday find him, though he knows no one ever will. Stalingrad has become a mass grave that will swallow them all. The 6th Army surrenders on February 2, 1943. Klaus survives by luck and chance. One of 91,000 prisoners marched east into Soviet captivity. They walk through frozen landscapes, dying in groups by the roadside, abandoned where they fall. The Wehrmacht's elite Eastern Army has been destroyed, broken against the city it almost conquered. Klaus is sent to a prisoner camp in Siberia, far beyond the Urals where winter lasts 8 months and the sun barely rises above the horizon. The conditions are designed to kill through labor and cold and starvation. Most prisoners don't survive their first winter. Klaus survives 3. During those years in the barracks where men die quietly in the night, Klaus thinks about Sarah. He reconstructs every conversation, every moment from those months in Minsk. He remembers teaching her German, reading to her from the children's book he found, watching her silent face transform by small degrees into something almost like childhood. He wonders if she's alive. Statistics say no. The Holocaust machinery was efficient and thorough. The Minsk ghetto was liquidated in October 1943, survivors sent to Sobibor and Treblinka. The probability of a 6-year-old girl surviving alone in occupied Belarus approaches 0. But Klaus allows himself to wonder anyway. In the frozen darkness of Siberia, hope is sometimes all that remains. May 1949. Klaus is released from Soviet captivity as part of the final repatriation of German prisoners. He is 31 years old and looks 50. The years in Siberia have transformed him into something gaunt and hollow, barely recognizable as the boy who once listened with careful precision to teachers speaking of racial destiny. He returns to a Germany that no longer exists. Munich is rubble and reconstruction, the Reich's grandiose visions replaced with the desperate pragmatism of survival. His father died during the Allied bombing. His mother died of disease in 1946. Klaus has no family, no home, no purpose beyond existing in a world that has moved forward without him. He finds work in construction, rebuilding the city his nation destroyed through its choices. The labor is hard but Klaus welcomes it, the physical exhaustion that allows sleep without dreams. He shares a room with 4 other men in a boarding house that smells of cabbage and old smoke. Nobody talks about the war. That silence at least feels familiar. But Klaus cannot stop thinking about Sarah. In the evenings, after work, he visits the offices that have been established to help locate displaced persons, to reunite survivors, to process the aftermath of genocide. The bureaucracy is overwhelming, millions of missing people reduced to index cards and filing systems. He searches for Sarah Feldman from Minsk, Jewish girl, born approximately 1936, last seen September 1942. The clerks look at him with the weary patience of those who process thousands of such requests daily. Most missing children are dead. Most survivors are adults now. Most searches end in the terrible confirmation of what everyone already knows. Klaus searches anyway. He writes letters to relief organizations, to displaced persons camps, to the Jewish agencies working to identify survivors and place orphans. He provides what details he can without mentioning his own role. Former Wehrmacht soldiers are not welcome in these offices, their inquiries met with suspicion at best. Months pass. The letters accumulate, inquiries, dead ends, apologies. Records from Minsk are fragmentary. The Wehrmacht destroyed most documentation during retreat. The SS burned what remained. The Soviet army preserved little. The ghetto itself exists now only in memory, its physical location rebuilt as Soviet housing blocks. Klaus continues searching. It becomes routine, almost ritual. Every Sunday he visits the displaced person's office in Munich and checks the new arrival lists. Every evening he writes letters on behalf of Sarah Feldman, describing a girl who might be anyone, who might be nowhere, who almost certainly is dead. In October 1950, 18 months after his return, Klaus receives a response from the Jewish Relief Agency in Paris. They have located a Sarah Feldman, originally from Minsk, currently residing in a children's home in Brussels. The information is fragmentary. The girl claims protection by a German soldier during the occupation. She was found by Soviet forces in late 1945, hiding in the basement of a destroyed building, alone and nearly starved. The letter provides an address. It notes that the girl is 16 now, being prepared for emigration to Palestine. It asks if Klaus's family, what his relationship to the child was, why he is searching for her after so many years. Klaus doesn't answer the questions. He simply travels to Brussels on the first available train, using what little money he has saved. The children's home is a converted mansion in a quiet neighborhood, filled with the traumatized remnants of the Holocaust. The administrator is a severe woman who examines Klaus with open suspicion when he explains why he's there. Sarah Feldman has been through enough, she says. We don't allow Wehrmacht soldiers to disturb our children's recovery. Klaus understands. He has no right to see Sarah, no claim on her attention or gratitude. He should leave, should accept that his small gesture of protection 8 years ago has concluded with her survival, however damaged. That should be enough. Instead, he asks simply, "Could you give her something for me?" He pulls Werner's wooden horse from his pocket. It has traveled with him through Stalingrad, through Siberia, through the years of searching. The administrator takes it, her expression softening slightly. "I'll give this to her," she says. "And I'll tell her someone was looking for her. But I won't say who unless she wants to know." Klaus nods. It's more than he deserves. He turns to leave, but the administrator stops him with a question. "Why? Why did you protect her?" Klaus considers lying, providing some explanation that makes sense in retrospect, something noble or strategic or comprehensible. Instead he tells the truth, "Because I could. And because someone had to." The administrator studies him for a long moment. Then she says, "Wait here." 15 minutes pass. Klaus stands in the lobby of the children's home, surrounded by photographs of survivors, by memorial plaques for those who didn't survive, by the institutional furniture of organized charity. He is preparing to leave when he sees her. Sarah stands at the top of the stairs, 16 years old now, no longer the silent child he hid behind false walls. She's taller, harder, transformed by survival in ways Klaus can only imagine. She holds Werner's wooden horse in her hand, turning it over slowly. She descends the stairs carefully, each step measured, until she stands in front of Klaus. They study each other without speaking. Klaus sees the child he protected overlaid with the young woman she's become. Sarah sees the soldier who gave her false papers, who read her stories, who chose to disobey everything he'd been taught. Finally, Sarah speaks in German that has lost most of its Yiddish accent. "You came back." Klaus nods. "I wanted to know if you survived." "I survived." She says it flatly, without celebration or relief, as if survival itself is neither victory nor defeat but simply a fact to be acknowledged. They stand in silence for a moment. Then Sarah asks the question Klaus has been dreading. "What happened to the others? To Fischer? To Werner?" "Fischer died at Stalingrad. Werner was executed in Minsk for helping hide you." Sarah absorbs this without visible reaction. She has learned to carry grief silently, the way she learned everything during those years. "They shouldn't have died for me. They died knowing what they chose," Klaus says. "Werner especially. He had daughters of his own. He understood." Sarah turns the wooden horse over in her hands, studying Werner's careful carving. "I remember this. He made it for me in one evening. I watched him work on it with his pocket knife, concentrating so hard he didn't notice me watching." The memory hangs between them, a fragment of humanity preserved from a time when humanity was systematically being destroyed. Sarah looks up at Klaus, and in her eyes he sees something he didn't expect. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, but simple acknowledgement. "Thank you," she says. "For trying." Klaus nods. It's all he wanted really. Not absolution for everything else he participated in, not redemption for the machinery he was part of, just acknowledgement that he tried, that for a few months in Minsk he chose to be something other than what he'd been taught to be. Sarah returns to the children's home. Klaus returns to Munich and the reconstruction that will occupy his remaining years. They don't stay in contact. Their connection was forged in circumstances too particular to survive peacetime. But Klaus knows, finally, that Sarah survived, that his small rebellion against the Reich's machinery achieved something beyond its own futility. 3 people risked everything to protect 1 child. 1 died. 2 survived. The mathematics remain impossible to calculate. But the gesture itself, the choice to act with conscience when conscience meant death, that remains. It's not redemption. Klaus will carry his participation in the Wehrmacht's crimes until his death. But it's something. In a war designed to destroy individual moral choice, Klaus, Fischer and Werner chose anyway. And 1 child lived. December 1963. Klaus Hartmann, 51 years old, works as a night watchman in a Munich warehouse. The city has been rebuilt, transformed from ruins into something modern and prosperous. The war exists now mostly in museums and ceremonies, in the memorial plaques that mark where things once stood before they were destroyed. Klaus lives alone in a small apartment near the river. He has never married, never had children of his own. The war took something from him that peacetime couldn't restore, some capacity for normal life that was hollowed out in Stalingrad and Siberia and left empty afterward. He doesn't talk about his war service. When asked, he says he fought in Russia, was captured, came home. The details remain unspoken. Germany is engaged in its collective forgetting, the decision to move forward rather than backward, to build rather than remember. Klaus understands this impulse even as he recognizes its inadequacy. But Klaus carries Werner's wooden horse in his coat pocket. Every day, going to work or returning home, he touches it through the fabric, a reminder of choices made when choices cost everything. In 1963, Klaus reads that the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials are beginning. Former SS officers and camp guards are being prosecuted for their roles in the Holocaust. The trials are controversial, drawing protesters who believe Germany should move forward rather than dwell on past crimes. Klaus follows the coverage carefully, reading every account, studying photographs of the accused men who look so ordinary in their civilian suits. These men, he thinks, are not so different from himself. They followed orders. They did their duty as they understood it. They participated in the machinery of genocide through obedience and moral cowardice. The difference between them and Klaus is measured in one small act of disobedience, one child protected for a few months when protection was forbidden. Is that difference meaningful? Klaus doesn't know. He saved one life while participating in operations that destroyed thousands. His conscience rebelled once while accepting horror dozens of other times. The accounting is impossible to reconcile. One evening, Klaus receives a letter forwarded through the Jewish Relief Agency. It's from Sarah, now living in Israel with a family of her own. She writes that she is married, that she has 2 children, that she survived the years after the war through a combination of luck and stubbornness. She emigrated to Israel in 1951, joined a kibbutz, learned Hebrew, built a life from the ruins of everything she lost. She writes that she thinks about those months in Minsk sometimes, about the false wall and Werner's wooden horse and Klaus teaching her German pronunciation. She writes that she doesn't forgive Germany for what was done to her family, to her people, to the 6 million who died in the camps and ghettos and killing fields. Forgiveness isn't possible for crimes of that magnitude. But she acknowledges that individual people made individual choices. That Klaus, Fischer, and Werner chose to disobey, chose to protect, chose to risk everything for a child who meant nothing to them except as a human being requiring protection. That choice, she writes, deserves acknowledgement even if it doesn't balance against everything else. She ends the letter with a photograph. It shows Sarah with her husband and 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a modest house in a small Israeli town. The children are perhaps 6 and 4, close to the age Sarah was when her mother pressed her into Klaus's arms in Minsk. On the back of the photograph, Sarah has written one line: "These children exist because you chose conscience over obedience." Klaus frames the photograph and places it beside his bed. He looks at it every evening before sleeping, this evidence that his rebellion produced something beyond its own gesture. 2 children who would never have existed if Klaus had handed Sarah over to the auxiliaries that morning. 2 lives descended from the choice 3 German soldiers made to disobey. The mathematics are still impossible. 2 lives don't balance against thousands dead. Sarah's family doesn't redeem Klaus for his participation in Wehrmacht operations. The photograph doesn't erase the villages burned, the partisans executed, the machinery of war he was part of for 4 years. But it matters anyway. In some way that defies calculation, it matters. #epilogue. 1978. Klaus Hartmann dies quietly in his sleep at age 66. He is alone in his apartment when it happens, the transition from life to death unmarked by ceremony or witness. The landlord discovers him 2 days later when rent comes due and Klaus doesn't answer his door. There is no funeral beyond a brief municipal cremation. Klaus has no family, few friends, no community to mourn his passing. His ashes are scattered in a common grave with others who died alone and unmourned, their names recorded in municipal ledgers and forgotten. Among Klaus's possessions, the police find Werner's wooden horse, Sarah's letter, and the photograph of her family. There is also a notebook, pages filled with Klaus's careful handwriting, documenting what happened in Minsk in 1942. The events, the choices, the cost. Written down as if writing could make sense of things that refused to make sense. The notebook finds its way eventually to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. It's filed among thousands of similar testimonies, individual stories of horror and resistance, of collaboration and conscience, of ordinary people making choices in circumstances that allowed for no good choices. Sarah, now 63 and a grandmother, visits Yad Vashem to see the notebook. She reads Klaus's account of those months, the false wall, Fischer's help, Werner's carving, her disappearance before Stalingrad. She reads about Klaus's years in Soviet captivity, his search for her after the war, his attempt to understand what his small rebellion meant in the context of everything else he participated in. She finds no answers in his words. Klaus himself found no answers. He saved one child while serving in an army that destroyed millions. He chose conscience once while accepting obedience dozens of other times. The contradiction remained unresolved until his death. But Sarah stands in the museum looking at Werner's wooden horse, now displayed in a case alongside Klaus's notebook and her own testimony. 3 German soldiers who chose, for a few months, to be human rather than obedient. Their reward was Werner's execution, Fischer's death, Klaus's lifelong burden of impossible moral accounting. And yet, Sarah's children exist. Her grandchildren exist. A family line that should have been extinguished in the Minsk ghetto continues because 3 men chose disobedience when disobedience meant death. Is that redemption for Klaus Hartmann? No. Redemption isn't available for participation in the Wehrmacht's crimes. The moral debt of those years cannot be repaid. Is it meaningful? Yes. Despite everything. Despite the impossible mathematics and the unresolved contradictions and the thousands of other children who were not saved. Because sometimes, in the midst of industrial evil and systematic murder, individual conscience surfaces in small acts of rebellion. Not enough to stop the machinery. Not enough to balance the accounting. Just enough to preserve one fragment of humanity when humanity is being systematically destroyed. Klaus Hartmann was not a hero. Heroes are uncomplicated, their choice is clear, their morality straightforward. Klaus was a soldier who participated in terrible things, who followed terrible orders, who was complicit in genocide through obedience and moral cowardice. But for a few months he chose otherwise. He protected a child when protection was forbidden. He risked everything for someone who meant nothing to him except as a human being requiring protection. That choice doesn't redeem him. But it matters. In the darkness of the Holocaust, it matters that some people chose conscience over obedience. That some soldiers saw a child and recognized a child, not a category or a racial designation or an enemy to be eliminated. It matters that Klaus Hartmann, trained from childhood to accept Nazi ideology without question, found within himself the capacity to disobey. It matters that Werner carved a wooden horse for a 6-year-old girl who needed something to hold on to. It matters that Fischer helped conceal her, knowing discovery meant execution. These small gestures of humanity don't balance against the 6 million dead. They don't excuse the Wehrmacht's crimes or redeem individual soldiers' participation in those crimes. But they prove that even in systems designed to eliminate individual moral choice, choice remains possible. That conscience can surface even in those trained to suppress it. That humanity can persist even in circumstances designed to destroy it. Klaus Hartmann saved one child. In the context of the Holocaust, that gesture is almost meaningless. One life against 6 million dead. But to Sarah, to her children, to her grandchildren, to everyone descended from that choice in Minsk in 1942, it meant everything. The wooden horse sits in its display case in Jerusalem, Werner's careful carving preserved as testament to a moment when 3 German soldiers chose to be something other than what their nation demanded. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. And sometimes, in the darkness, something is all we have.